Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on all things related to narcissism and difficult relationships and toxic people, and hoping that it helps you understand all of that. This video actually goes back to a series that was already done on patterns we see in survivors of narcissistic abuse. A long list of them. There's about 30 of them. Now, some things didn't get seen, as you can imagine. Put together something like that and say, oh my gosh, over time, I was like, oh, I forgot this one. And this is one that I forgot. So today we're going to talk about the pattern of guilt, which is a very, very classical part of the presentation of narcissistic abuse. And again, this is part of a larger series that you can go back into this YouTube channel, and you'll see there's many, many episodes on the various parts, the various patterns we see in narcissistic abuse. So let's talk about this idea of guilt as a pattern we see in people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse. Guilt is the emotion we feel when we believe we have done something wrong. For people, most people who have normally wired nervous systems, guilt is uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable enough that it's an incentive to not do something bad, so we don't need to feel guilty, because people don't like to feel guilty. In fact, that feeling is so icky, we're like, oh, I'm going to do the bad thing, so I don't need to feel guilty. And yet, many people, especially people going through narcissistic abuse, will feel guilty when they ostensibly have actually literally done nothing wrong. Guilt is a very common part, like I said, a very common part of the pattern we witness in people experiencing narcissistic abuse. People experiencing narcissistic abuse are constantly walking around thinking and feeling bad, honestly, for something that they believe that they've done wrong. So let's just start with some basics on what guilt is about. I'm going to give you several examples that you should be able to identify with to help understand guilt. You go to the store. You put things in your cart. They check you out. You leave the store, you drive home, and when you get home, you realize that there's something you didn't pay for because it was in that bottom part of your cart. So you feel guilty because it costs, I don't know, more than $20 or something. You may even call the store. You might even go through the trouble of going back to the store because you feel like, I shouldn't take this thing. You're attracted to a coworker, and you're just friends, and you already are in your own close relationship. And you're spending a lot of time talking to the coworker, you're attracted to them, and you agree to meet this person at a park near a place where you traditionally and regularly run your errands. You leave the house, you tell your partner that you're going out to run errands at your usual places, a grocery store and all of that. And you do go to the grocery store, but then you go to the park and you meet the coworker. And you feel guilty for lying to your partner. Because, yeah, you did go to the grocery store, but a little bit of a sin of omission, right? And you did something that if your partner found out, it would hurt them. Another example, you're a student, and a classmate shares the answers to a quiz, because you're in the same class but at different times, and they share the answers to a quiz that they took an hour earlier and you're going to take in a little while. And you copy the answers, and you feel guilty. In all of these examples, there was, at some level, big and small levels, violation of social and ethical codes. People probably feel bad if those things happen, and maybe they won't do them again. Maybe they'll apologize. Maybe they'll try to fix it. Now, for those folks out there with more of a psychopathic streak or narcissistic streak, you might not feel anything, or you might feel entitled. Some people might feel like, I feel bad, but that store is an hour away, I'm not going to drive back, whatever it is. But at least there was that feeling like that wasn't cool. I should have just walked off with that thing in my cart or stolen the quiz answers. But now let's talk about another set of examples of guilt. What about in a situation you have a narcissistic mom, and she expects you to call her every single day? Let's say your mom is perfectly healthy, she's got a good life, but she still walks around feeling that nobody likes her, and that you're her child, so you owe her a call. You hate the calls. The calls are largely your mom being a victim and complaining about other people in the family and being angry. She never asks about you. But if you were to miss one of those calls, she'll get really angry. It's like you make these calls just to be sort of a punching bag. You finally set a boundary and say, you know what, Mom, I can't call you every day. I am really busy. I have a full-time job. I got kids. I got other stuff to deal with. I'd be happy that if we set a time, I'll call you once per week. Would you feel guilty in that situation? Because if you would feel guilty, because a lot of people would, what did the person do wrong there? They let her down? They didn't enable her? They set a boundary? Are those bad things to feel guilty for? Here's another example. You have a narcissistic sibling who gets away with everything. They're the golden child in the family. This sibling sucks all the oxygen out of any family event, but they expect that any event that's about them or involves them, like their own birthday or their own anniversary or their wedding, goes off without a hitch. Your sibling is going to host a holiday get-together of some kind. And they want everything to start on time and things to happen in a certain way, and they want everyone to look perfect for pictures. But this is, of course, the person who ruins everyone else's events. You watch the clock, you're busy at work, you really want to go, you have to get some stuff resolved, but finally you do drag yourself to go. And because of all the things you need to do, you're late. And this enrages your sibling. You feel guilty for running late to this holiday get-together, knowing how important time was. You know inside that you could have probably gotten things done in a way and that you were running late because you actually are disgusted by the fact that this sibling always gets their way, that the family system runs around to make this one sibling's life run seamlessly, but the sibling has no insight into the pain and the harm they've done to others because everyone is afraid of them, so does everything according to their rules. So you, in a tiny little way, you were late because you just wanted a little of the gratification of that control. You didn't want the sibling to control you. You didn't want them to always get their way. But you felt guilty for being late. What'd you do wrong? Would you feel bad? Did you feel like you did something wrong there? Was showing up late wrong? It's just a holiday party. Was having the feelings about not wanting your sibling to have everything go perfect for them, was that wrong? Does it need to result in guilt? Another example for you to chew on. You have a spouse or partner who is invalidating, manipulative, and just a general gaslighting nightmare. You are not leaving the marriage because you have children and you don't want to do the whole joint custody, split the assets thing. But internally, you get a little bit of glee, a little bit of that schadenfreude when things go badly for him because you're so angry. You think of the day, you look forward to the day that someone's going to call this spouse of yours out for the terrible things that this person has done to other people. And then you feel guilty for having these bad thoughts. What did you do wrong to feel guilty for? Think bad thoughts? Does that qualify for guilt? Many survivors of narcissistic abuse either feel guilty for having feelings or because they feel like they violated certain sorts of social, societal expectations that they were given. I feel guilty that I didn't get married. It's all my parents ever wanted for me, but I just didn't meet the right person. I love my work. I feel guilty that I didn't take over my family business. I can't stand the work. It is no interest of mine. My dad worked his whole life at it, and I couldn't stand working with him. He's very abusive. I feel guilty that I didn't go to my spouse's softball game. He loves all the attention it gets him, but it's actually kind of embarrassing for me. I feel guilty that I didn't give my adult child my old car, despite the fact that he verbally abuses me. I feel guilty about pretending to be sick so I don't have to go to my in-laws' Sunday dinner because they're so rude to me. The survivor of narcissistic abuse often feels guilt for things like not liking the narcissist in their lives, for feeling that they're not doing enough to please the narcissist. They feel guilty at feeling that they have let the narcissist down. And since the narcissists are always at the ready to tell you that you did let them down, it doubles down on your guilt. Many survivors of narcissistic abuse do not feel empowered or emboldened to speak out about how they feel or what they need or want particularly in that narcissistic relationship, but sometimes in many of their relationships. Maybe they get their little tiny, teeny passive victories, being a few minutes late and ruining this adult person's birthday party, or so they tell you, or they feel guilty about doing things that are actually very healthy, like setting an appropriate boundary, leaving an event early because the enabling and the toxicity is just too unhealthy for you to witness. But many times, people who are going through narcissistic abuse will ruminate about how much they absolutely dislike and detest a toxic family member or spouse or even their own adult child. It doesn't feel good to have those negative feelings in you. So you feel guilt about even thinking the thoughts. Your thoughts. You're guilty about your thoughts. You're not doing anything. You're just thinking. These are catch-22 relationships. You can't win if you communicate, and not only having to put up, if you do communicate, you'd have to put up with a verbal lashing, but then with feeling guilty because maybe you hurt the narcissist's feelings, which, because of the narcissist's tendency to feeling victimized when they get called out, is made worse. They'll often sit and say, how come everyone's out to get me? And you kind of ugly cry when that happens. You can't win if you set boundaries because you're going to feel guilty for setting that limit, though it's the only healthy thing to do. You can't win if you stay silent. You feel guilty for creating tension in the relationship. You can't win if you think a bad thought about them. You feel guilty for being a rotten person who thinks bad thoughts. Everywhere you turn, it's guilt, guilt, guilt. That's how trauma-bonded relationships work. You become your own worst judge, jury, and enemy. Guilt is the glue of the narcissistic relationship, and it can keep people stuck in these relationships for lifetimes. The other culprit is society. Society really has a lot to answer for. It tells you that you are wrong for not enabling the narcissist, for not giving second chances, for not giving the benefit of the doubt, for not forgiving, despite how many transgressions have happened. Society tells you that you have to be loyal to a family, even when they're unkind, cruel, or abusive, or that you shouldn't get divorced because it's shameful, despite the conditions. So that enabling of these toxic patterns from the world at large are a major driver of guilt, which is a core part of the experience of people going through narcissistic abuse. Guilt is also a part of what keeps the justification and cognitive dissonance alive. You feel guilty. You take responsibility. You feel you are to blame. And then you feel responsible for the problems in the relationship and feel you have no right to leave it or set a boundary in it because you're the guilty party. You feel guilty. You're always doing bad things, right? So what are you supposed to do about all this guilt as a massive pattern in narcissistic abuse? Listen, there's people out there that like to say guilt is a wasted emotion. I mean, I think it has its place. If you did do something wrong, make amends, learn from it, don't do it again. If this is, though, more about the guilt associated with trauma bonds, dissonance, and enabling, then the guilt is part of the toxic glue that binds this relationship. And wonder how you can ask for contrition. Why are you asking for contrition when you're the one who did nothing wrong? It's like going to confession and making stuff up to say because you didn't do anything wrong except maybe think a thought. You do the deeper dive on the societal messages you got growing up or even as an adult, and you need to critically analyze them. Then you need to recognize that your thoughts are a private, uncensored space where you can play things out, and it's okay. Having the thoughts and allowing them to play out is actually a really big step to breaking down cognitive dissonance. Instead of just trying to stop the thoughts, because they can sometimes be unsettling, and then jumping into the mire of guilt and justification, let those thoughts breathe. Your thoughts are yours, and nobody can judge them. As always, therapy. Therapy becomes really important around guilt. Guilt that emanates from a place of feeling that you have let people down, or just simply thought a bad thought, or just simply you feel guilty for being a human being. In therapy, we can take that in and dismantle it. Half the work I do in therapy is to say, you didn't do anything wrong. Guilt is a monster that not only gets people into narcissistic relationships, it keeps them in, and it makes it hard to get out or set boundaries. And that experience of guilt is a very classical part of narcissistic abuse. So I hope that clarifies that pattern. Please do check out the rest of that series, and thanks again for tuning in.